The sky burns a bloody crimson above a beleaguered Imperial outpost. Orc war horns echo through acrid smoke as green-skinned raiders storm the last defenses. Exhausted Astra Militarum soldiers clutch their laser guns, muttering final prayers to the Emperor. This is the end, they think. All hope is gone. Then, without warning, salvation arrives in the most nightmarish form imaginable. Black-armored giants stride out of the choking haze, their silhouettes wreathed in flickering flames. They move in eerie silence, adorned with macabre symbols of death. Bone-white skulls, skeletal hands, and other grim tokens emblazoned on ebony power armor. Bolter fire erupts from the newcomers, but even the muzzle flare is strange, burning an unnatural orange and red. Each round hits with uncanny precision, punching through orc bodies as if guided by vengeance itself. The orcs, brutal creatures who moments ago were howling for blood, now shriek in confusion and fear. Under this sudden onslaught, the horde's momentum falters. The mysterious warriors press the attack, methodical and relentless. One ignites a stream of promethium from a heavy flamer, bathing a knot of orcs in phantom fire that clings to their flesh. Another lifts a bolt gun, its barrel trailing smoke, and fells an orc knob with a single explosive round to the head. A third silent giant drives into a mob of greenskins with a combat blade, each stab delivered with surgical lethality. Not a word is spoken among the black-armored saviors. No battle cry, no shouted command. In grim silence they reap their foes. Within minutes, the battle is turned on its head. The Xenos that have not been cut down flee in disarray, terrified by what they've just witnessed. The Imperial defenders barely have time to register that they've been saved. Some soldiers cross themselves or whisper that the Emperor has sent his angels. Others are too stunned to do anything but stare. As quickly as they appeared, the black-armored figures are gone. Perhaps one trooper catches a final glimpse of them at the edge of vision. A cluster of dark forms fading into smoke, eyes burning like hot coals beneath their skull-helmed visages. In their wake lies only silence, the stench of charred alien flesh, and a pile of smoldering corpses. Such is a typical encounter with the Legion of the Damned. They are known in hushed Imperial lore by that name, the Legion of the Damned, a mysterious brotherhood of space marines that appears unbidden when doom hangs by a thread. Their arrival is never heralded by fanfare or communication, only by the sudden roar of bolters and the glow of spectral flames. Once their bloody work is done, they vanish as quickly as they came, often leaving behind nothing but the savaged remains of the Emperor's foes and awestruck survivors. To the Imperium's enemies, they are reapers in the dark, seemingly invulnerable and utterly merciless. To humanity, they are guardian angels as frightening as they are heroic, the Emperor's wrath incarnate, or perhaps the spirits of the righteous dead returned for vengeance. Little is truly known about this phantom army, though over the millennia a few truths have come to light as scattered reports are compared. The legionaries invariably attack to save some part of the Imperium from disaster, implying they have powers of prediction or foresight that even the most gifted Imperial psychers cannot rival. Whenever the Legion of the Damned emerges, it is always at the crisis point of a battle, in the darkest hour before defeat. No plea for aid summons them. They simply know where to go, as if guided by some higher directive or grim fate. This uncanny timing has saved countless Imperial lives and turned the tide in wars that seemed all but lost. Equally uncanny is their method of arrival. They materialize out of nowhere, often preceded by an aura of eerie phenomena. A sudden chill in the air, a whiff of sulfur or ash on the wind, electrical disturbances that send Auspex readings haywire. In one recorded incident, Vox communications on a besieged world fell mysteriously silent moments before the Legion attacked, as if reality itself held its breath. No dropships or teleport beacons announce their coming. Scans rarely detect anything until the Legionnaires are already in the thick of the fight. It is as though they step between the folds of reality. Some whisper they emerge from the warp itself, arriving on the battlefield in an instant. And when the battle is won, they fade away just as inexplicably. Many reports claim the legionaries simply disappear amid flames or smoke, on surveillance-picked feeds. On the rare occasions machines even capture them. The warriors often flicker and vanish, leaving bewildered tech priests with nothing but static and damaged machine spirits. Whatever technology or sorcery enables their comings and goings remains beyond Imperial understanding. The appearance of the Legionnaires only heightens their legend. They bear the power armor of the Adeptus Astartes, but altered in morbid fashion. Each warrior's battle plate is painted matte black, a black that seems to devour light. Even under a glaring sun or flood lamps, their figures look like silhouettes cut from midnight. In stark contrast, their armor is adorned with ghastly decorations, skeletal motifs, and fiery iconography. Ribcage patterns and bone designs cover their pauldrons and breastplates. Grinning skull emblems leer from their helms. Flames are painted licking up their greaves and gauntlets. In combat, these chilling symbols seem to come alive, literally igniting with ghostly fire. Witnesses have described how the bone designs on a Legionnaire's armor glow ember orange, as if lit from within, and how a hazy aura of fire clings to each warrior. It's common to see a Legion warrior wreathed head to toe in flames as he fights, appearing as a walking charnel specter. This flame doesn't harm the Legionnaire at all, but to those who behold it, it cements the impression that these warriors are not entirely of the mortal realm. Their demeanor in battle is equally unnerving. Absolute silence. The Legion of the Damned never issues a Vox challenge, never shouts a battle cry or prayer. They communicate with one another wordlessly, through means unknown. Perhaps a form of psychic communion, or simply seamless coordination, honed by long years fighting as one. To allied forces, fighting alongside them is an eerie experience. A squad of beleaguered guardsmen might suddenly find black-armored figures at their shoulder, but those figures will not respond to hails or desperate questions, nor acknowledge thanks or orders. They simply engage the enemy with inhuman focus and efficiency, then depart when victory is secured. This wordless aid has given rise to countless superstitions among soldiers and even fellow space marines who have witnessed the Legion. Some believe the Legionnaires are literally blessed by the Emperor's spirit, his angels of death answering prayers on the battlefield. Others whisper they are the vengeful dead, the souls of slain heroes, granted a final chance to enact vengeance before resting. Fighting alongside them is said to be both a relief and a test of one's nerves. Supernatural or not, their combat prowess is very real. Legion of the Damned warriors fight with a precision and skill that stands out even among space marines. They strike without hesitation or wasted effort, seemingly knowing exactly where to hit the enemy for maximum effect. A Legionnaire's bolter, often an older model or custom pattern weapon, fires shells that burn with a strange incendiary fury. These bolts punch through armor that would shrug off ordinary rounds. Imperial observers have noted that Legionnaires rarely, if ever, reload their guns during battle. Even in drawn-out engagements, they keep firing far beyond the magazine capacity of their bolters, as if ammunition is no limitation for the damned. In close combat, they are terrifyingly efficient. They don't engage in showy duels or exuberant violence. They simply eliminate targets with one precise stroke or shot. Throats are slit through the tiniest gap in armor. Blades punch through hearts and eye sockets with surgical accuracy. All the while, the legionnaires seem to endure punishment that would fell even other Astartes. Reports abound of these spectral warriors walking unharmed out of explosions and plasma blasts that should have vaporized them. Melta beams sizzle straight through their bodies with no effect, as though passing through ghosts. When truly devastating hits do land, a legionnaire fights on despite injuries that ought to be crippling, showing no sign of pain. This apparent invulnerability, or perhaps unfeeling resilience, fuels the belief that they might already be dead or something beyond human. In truth, the origins of the Legion of the Damned are one of the great mysteries of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. But among all the theories and whispered tales, one story stands out. A story of a lost chapter of Space Marines, consumed by fire and fate, that may lie at the heart of this legend. To uncover the Legion's secret, we must travel back in time to the late 41st millennium and the ill-fated voyage of the Firehawks chapter. The story goes that the Legion of the Damned were not always ghostly saviors. Once they were flesh and blood space marines, a loyalist chapter known as the Firehawks. The Firehawks were zealous and uncompromising, notorious for unleashing overwhelming force and leaving nothing but ashes in their wake. Their name was no coincidence. In the year 963, M41, the Firehawks chapter fleet was deployed to a war zone in the Crow's World subsector. Their mission: to put an end to a rampant Eldar pirate threat that was wreaking havoc on Imperial colonies. The situation was dire enough that the entirety of the Firehawks chapter, all 5 of their starships, including their mobile fortress monastery, Raptorus Rex, carrying over 800 Astartes and 2,000 support personnel, was sent en masse. They translated into the warp from the Piraeus system, expecting to re-emerge at their destination mere hours later. They never arrived. Something went horribly wrong during that warp jump. The fleet was caught in a catastrophic warp storm, a tempest of psychic madness and raw chaos that twists reality into nightmarish shapes. In that hellish storm, the Firehawks suddenly found themselves battling more than turbulence. Warp entities, dreadful creatures of the Imperium, assailed their ships. Geller field failures sparked, demons clawed at the hulls, and one by one the proud vessels of the chapter were torn apart or lost to the howling void. Imagine the scene. Strike cruisers cracking open like eggshells, crew and space marines alike sucked screaming into the abyss, astropaths and navigators overwhelmed by the insanity of the warp, valiant brothers making last stands against demonic borders on ruptured decks lit by strobing emergency lights. It was, to put it mildly, a very bad day to be a Firehawk. In the end, only one ship, perhaps the Raptorus Rex itself, managed a desperate escape. By some combination of skill, sacrifice, and sheer luck, or the Emperor's grim mercy, that last ship ripped free from the warp's grasp. It burst back into real space far, far off course, deep in the galactic east, beyond even the guiding light of the Astronomicon. About 200 space marines had survived this ordeal, out of the original 800 or more. All of their novices and human support staff were gone. Their reserve of gene seed was lost with the destroyed ships. The chapter's command structure was in ruins, with most of their officers dead. And the survivors soon discovered that escape had come at a terrible price. In the weeks following their emergence from the warp, the Firehawks began to suffer bizarre and gruesome changes. Their skin turned ashen and began to blister and crack. Open wounds refused to heal. Flesh festered and decayed as if an invisible fire was consuming them from within. A strange warp-borne contagion had taken hold, one beyond any apothecary's skill to cure. These Space Marines, genetically engineered super soldiers who know no fear, realized they were literally rotting alive. Death was coming for them, slow and agonizing. Many did die in those first months, despite the Astartes' legendary resilience. Perhaps half of the remaining brothers succumbed to the creeping corruption or perished from their injuries. Those who lived were in constant pain and beset by the beginnings of madness. Think about it. These warriors had seen their chapter all but destroyed. They were lost in an uncharted region, far from any ally. And now their own bodies were grotesquely betraying them. It's enough to break even a Space Marine's iron will, and indeed the Firehawk's survivors teetered on the brink of despair and insanity. Yet, even as their minds frayed, one thing held firm: their loyalty to the Emperor and their hatred for his enemies. If they were going to die, if they were damned anyway, they resolved to make their deaths count. They would not crawl away and await the end. Instead, they chose to become the Emperor's vengeance incarnate until their last breath. One imagines a somber council taking place among the surviving Firehawks, gaunt, pain-racked Space Marines standing amidst the flickering lumens of their crippled ship, making a pact. They stripped their armor of all chapter insignias and honors, for the Firehawks as a chapter were officially no more, and they themselves were half in the grave. They repainted every suit of armor jet black. Upon this dark canvas, each Marine painted bones, skulls, and flames, the personal emblems of death, as both a remembrance of fallen brethren and a warning to the foes they intended to meet. Gone were the proud hawk emblems and flame-orange heraldry of the Firehawks. The warriors had refashioned themselves into harbingers of death, each one a walking omen of mortality. Formal ranks and companies were abolished. With so few left and so many officers gone, there was no need for captains or chapter masters. In the face of certain doom, they declared all brothers equal. Every one of them was a dead man walking, and death would be the great equalizer of their company. This egalitarian approach was unheard of in Astartes culture, but then nothing about their situation was normal. With their new grim identity forged, they turned to the question of what now? They were stranded and slowly dying. They had no means to recruit new initiates or preserve their gene seed for a future generation. In effect, their chapter's line would end with them. Any ordinary force might have sought a quiet place to hide or attempted to return to Imperial space to beg for aid. Not these Marines. Perhaps it was the madness brought on by their curse, or perhaps a final clarity of purpose, but they decided to wage an eternal war against the enemies of the Imperium until the last of them fell. If they could not live for the Emperor, then by the throne they would die for him, as spectacularly and righteously as possible. According to accounts later pieced together, the Firehawks' survivors sought guidance in an unlikely form: the Emperor's Tarot. The Tarot is an ancient deck of cryptic cards used for divination, said to be attuned to the Emperor's psychic will. In their desperation, these Astartes turned to mysticism and prophecy. We can picture them, gaunt and feverish, huddled around a flickering strategium console, laying out the Emperor's tarot cards with trembling, armored hands. Perhaps in their state they truly believed the Emperor was speaking to them through the cards. Or maybe they had a librarian among them interpreting visions. One way or another, they claimed to find answers. The tarot indicated distant battlefields, crises unfolding across the galaxy, places where Imperial forces were on the brink of annihilation. Those would be the sites of the Firehawks' final crusade. And so began the War of the Legion of the Damned. The Firehawks, officially declared lost, presumed dead, and mourned by the Imperium, were reborn as something else entirely. They embraced the moniker that history would later give them. these plague-stricken Marines became an anonymous, terrifyingly effective force striking out from the shadows, carrying the fire of retribution to the Imperium's foes. Every battle they entered was essentially a suicide mission, and they were fine with that. In fact, they welcomed it. They had nothing left to lose except their lives, and those they were determined to spend like ammunition to achieve victory for the Emperor, one fight at a time. It's worth noting that at this point, nobody in the wider Imperium knew what had happened to the Firehawks. As far as anyone on Terra was concerned, they had vanished into the warp. End of story. 20 standard years after their disappearance, the Administratum officially classified the chapter as Lost Perditus. The great bell of lost souls on Holy Terra tolled 1,000 times in their honor, an ear-shattering funeral dirge heard across the ecclesiarchal palace. The Imperium does love its dramatic gestures. 1,000 tolls of a giant bell certainly drive the point home. It's even said the Emperor himself, or at least his priests, ordered a black candle lit in the chapel of fallen heroes, signifying the Firehawks' eternal memory among the honored dead. Eulogies were likely given. The chapter's name was entered into the rolls of lost heroes. The galaxy moved on, believing that entire chapter was gone forever. But the Firehawks were not gone. They were out there in the dark, preparing to make war in a way no one truly expected. The first signs that something strange was afoot came in 986, M41. An Imperial Navy patrol passing through the remote Jakor Tal system, held by Orc pirates at the time, stumbled upon the aftermath of an apocalyptic battle. Orc ships and settlements were utterly devastated, wreckage and carcasses everywhere, like some enraged force had torn through and vanished. No Imperial task force was known to be operating in that area, and Orcs aren't in the habit of massacring themselves, so it was a perplexing mystery. The Navy patrol logged the incident and moved on. Soon, similar reports emerged from adjoining sectors. An outpost of chaos cultists found completely wiped out with no evidence of the attackers. A Tyranid bioship fleet drifting in ruin as if ambushed and destroyed before it reached its target. A noted pirate base reduced to smoking rubble with no survivors or witnesses. In each case, Imperial forces arrived only afterward, bewildered at who or what had intervened. It was as if a phantom army was roaming the stars, doing the Emperor's bloody work unasked and unseen. Naturally, this pattern caught the attention of the Inquisition. Mysterious destruction of the Emperor's foes with no known Imperial units involved tends to raise eyebrows among those tasked with safeguarding the Imperium. Agents of the Ordo Malleus and Ordo Hereticus quietly began investigating, looking for any clue about these unseen saviors or avengers. For months, they had little to go on besides rumors and circumstantial evidence. Then came the incident that truly announced the Legion of the Damned to those in power, though it still only added to the enigma. In 987, M41, a remote Imperial research station deep in the galactic south, was under siege by a massive force of Orc freebooters, spacefaring green-skinned pirates who had come to loot and destroy. The station's few Astra Militarum defenders and tech adepts fought bravely, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. After 3 hours of brutal assault, the situation was beyond desperate. The Orcs had breached the perimeter and were swarming the compound. The surviving defenders prepared to sell their lives dearly, expecting to be overrun within the hour. And then, like in the opening scene we described, salvation arrived without warning. Out of nowhere, power-armored figures struck at the Orcs from behind. Station personnel later reported how the Vox channels filled with distorted war cries and howls, not from the attackers, who spoke not a word, but from panicking Orcs caught off guard. Through the choking smoke, black-armored giants advanced, guns blazing. Within half an hour, several hundred orcs lay dead, their assault completely broken by this surprise counterattack. The Greenskins, believing perhaps that fresh Imperial elite troops had teleported in, or maybe thinking vengeful spirits had come for them, fell into chaos and were slaughtered almost to the last. When the station's few stunned survivors emerged from cover, they found the orc forces in ruin and the mysterious warriors gone. The only trace of the saviors was a single battle standard planted in the blood-soaked ground. Imagine the scene. Weary, wounded tech adepts and soldiers approach this lone banner, flapping in the smoky breeze. Upon it, they see a symbol that some recognize with disbelief. It was the heraldry of the Firehawks chapter, which hadn't been seen in decades. The banner was battle-torn and scorched, but genuine. Inscribed upon it was a chilling motto: In dedicato imperatum ultra articulo mortis. Translated loosely, it means, for the Emperor, beyond the point of death. A fitting credo for warriors who had supposedly perished, yet fought on. Along with the banner, the unknown warriors had left a sealed data recorder and a few other artifacts, almost as if intentionally providing evidence of their identity. These items were hurriedly shipped back to Terra under seal of the Inquisition. There, the Adeptus Mechanicus and Administratum examined them in secret. The data recorder, once decrypted, reportedly contained a detailed account, perhaps the very log of the Firehawks' last voyage and their transformation into the Legion of the Damned. If so, that would have confirmed beyond doubt that the Legion was the Firehawks reborn. Additionally, armor fragments and weapons picked up from the site, and a few other battlefields where the Legion had intervened, were tested. Serial numbers, craftsmanship marks, gene seal imprints, all matched equipment known to have been issued to the Firehawks. The circumstantial evidence became overwhelming. Armed with this knowledge, certain high-ranking Imperial officials realized the monumental truth. The Legion of the Damned were the Firehawks, or what had become of them, still fighting somehow beyond death. But this truth was to be tightly guarded. Think of the implications: a band of warp-mutated, half-dead Astartes running around unsanctioned, yet aiding the Imperium. That's not a story the ecclesiarchy or administratum would want spreading unchecked. It challenges the strict dogma that anything touched by the warp is unclean. Normally, a space marine chapter afflicted by mutation or uncontrolled psychic phenomena might be declared excommunicate traitorous or subjected to a purge. Yet here were these legionaries, clearly warped in some way, but indisputably acting as agents of the Emperor's will. It's the kind of exception that makes the Puritans of the Inquisition very nervous. Thus, the discovery of the Legion's origin was classified at the highest levels. The High Lords and Senior Inquisitors opted for a policy of watchful non-interference. In other words, let them continue their mission and do not publicly acknowledge anything. The Legion of the Damned remained a mystery officially. Only those with the need to know and the proper clearance were informed of the likely truth, and even then with plenty of "this is highly classified" around it. One might cynically note that as long as the Legion was doing the Emperor's work, the Imperium's masters were content to let sleeping ghosts lie. From that point onward, the damned Firehawks, now truly the Legion of the Damned, continued to wage their silent, secret war across the galaxy. Over the following decades and into the opening of the 42nd millennium, more sightings and interventions were recorded. Each time the pattern was the same: appear suddenly at the moment of crisis, unleash hell on the enemies of mankind, then disappear without so much as a "by your leave." It didn't matter who the Imperium was fighting: orcs, chaos, tyrannids, necrons, rebellious humans. The Legion would strike them down all the same when the need was most dire. They ambushed Chaos war bands that were on the verge of wiping out isolated Imperial Guard armies. They tore into Genestealer cult uprisings, just as the cultists were about to topple planetary regimes. They even clashed with the traitor legions on occasion, such as during the siege of Vraxis Prime, where a warband of word-bearers was shocked to find themselves on the receiving end of a surprise attack by flaming specters. Poetic justice, given word-bearers fancy themselves experts in demonic theatrics. Each new encounter further fed the mythos. Imperial Guardsmen carried tales of fire-black knights that saved them at the last minute. Some officers, more skeptical, dismissed these as stress-induced hallucinations or propaganda. After all, until you've seen it yourself, it's easy to chalk up the Legion of the Damned to a figment of overactive imagination, a battlefield legend to inspire courage. But for those who have seen them, no amount of skepticism can erase what they witnessed. Interestingly, there are accounts that memories of encountering the Legion can be strangely fleeting or dreamlike. Inquisitorial reports note that many witnesses, if not debriefed quickly, begin to doubt what they saw, as if the brain cannot fully process the Legion's apparition. Tech priests report that the machine spirits of recording devices that capture the Legion's presence often become inexplicably traumatized or corrupted, yielding little to no usable data. Whether this is a deliberate effect the Legion projects to cover their tracks, or simply a byproduct of their warp-tainted nature, remains unknown. But enough evidence has been gathered by the Adeptus Astartes and the Inquisition to build a solid chronicle of the Legion's deeds, even if much of the galaxy only knows them as whispers and hearsay. Over time, the Legion of the Damned made its presence felt in some of the most dire conflicts of the late 41st and early 42nd millennium. Their interventions read like something out of a heroic legend or a horror tale, depending on your perspective. On the cemetery world of Certus Minor, for instance, an Imperial garrison was at its last gasp against a Chaos warband, the so-called Klaust Blood Crusade, which had overrun the planet's defenders. Just as the heretic forces were about to claim victory, the Legion of the Damned materialized among the shadowed mausoleums of that world's vast graveyards. Surviving guardsmen described black-armored figures advancing through drifting ash and smoke, cutting down chaos, space marines, and demonic creatures with disciplined fury. In a whirlwind of bolter fire and gouting flame, the Legion annihilated the invaders to the last. When Imperial reinforcements finally arrived days later, they found the enemy force utterly destroyed and the few remaining defenders in a state of shock, raving about how the spirits of the dead had come to life to save them. Fittingly, on a planet dedicated to the fallen, it was as if the honored dead themselves rose to fight for the Emperor. The event was quietly logged by the Ordo Malleus, and Certus Minor's people began referring to their mysterious saviors as the Ghost Legion. In another instance, the Legion appeared quite literally at the doorstep of Holy Terra. On Luna, Earth's moon, lies an important Adeptus Mechanicus shipyard and astropathic relay. During one scandalous episode, a cabal of renegade tech priests, the so-called Draco clan, attempted to sabotage Terra's communications and transportation network. They infiltrated Luna's docks with a plan to send a shuttle loaded with explosives and corrupted data viruses directly to the Imperial Palace's auto-archive. A Space Marines kill team from the Salamanders chapter was dispatched to intercept them. However, these loyal Astartes walked into a trap. The renegades had laid vacuum mines and automated turrets, and soon the Salamanders found themselves pinned down in the airless void of the docking bay, outnumbered and in dire straits. At that moment, observers on Luna's surface reported a bizarre phenomenon, a sudden plume of fear erupting inside the sealed dock, followed by comms chatter of unknown friendly contacts engaging the enemy. The Legion of the Damned had arrived within Luna's halls. How they managed to appear inside a secure moonbase without any alarms remains a mystery. One imagines more than a few magos scratching their augmetics over that. The black-armored figures cut down the heretic traitors from behind and freed the astonished salamanders. Thanks to this intervention, the trapped shuttle was secured before it could depart, and the threat to Terra's archives was eliminated. When the salamanders regrouped to thank their saviors, they found nothing but scorch marks and empty air. The legionaries had vanished into the shadows of the lunar facility. This act, never officially publicized for security reasons, likely prevented a catastrophe that would have echoed across the entire Imperium, crippling its administrative heart. It stands as a prime example of the Legion operating in the shadows to defend the Imperium's most vital interests without ever seeking recognition. The Legion of the Damned has also come to the aid of their fellow Adeptus Astartes at crucial moments. At the climax of Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade, the campaign that heralded the fall of Cadia, even the mighty Imperial fists found themselves hard-pressed. In one engagement, the Imperial Fist's legendary Star Fortress, the Phalanx, a massive space bastion and chapter monastery, was boarded by a horde of demons and chaos space marines. The attackers sought to cripple the Phalanx and scatter the Imperial Fist's strength. The fighting raged through the corridors and armories of the ancient fortress. Amid the din of alarms and the flicker of failing power conduits, squads of black-armored legionnaires suddenly appeared to reinforce the hard-pressed Imperial Fists. How did they get inside a sealed star fortress in the middle of space combat? No one knows. Perhaps they literally walked out of the warp into the halls of the Phalanx. Together, these fiery specters and the Fists fought back-to-back, purging the invaders deck by deck. Veteran Imperial Fists later recounted how surreal it was to see silent warriors with burning skeletons painted on their armor fighting alongside them in the sacred halls of their chapter's home. Thanks to this unexpected alliance, the enemy was defeated, and the Phalanx saved from falling into enemy hands. The moment victory was secured, the legionaries disappeared as mysteriously as they had arrived, leaving the Imperial Fists both grateful and unsettled by the encounter. During the desperate events of the fall of Cadia, the Legion made another dramatic appearance. As Cadia's defenses buckled and that world was breaking apart, a contingent of space wolves led by Wolf Lord Sven Bloodhowl undertook a last-ditch mission. They boarded a Blackstone fortress, an ancient planet-killing superweapon controlled by Abaddon's forces, intending to sabotage its power systems and prevent it from wreaking further havoc. Fighting through the fortress's twisted corridors, the Space Wolves reached the core, only to be met by overwhelming hordes of chaos cultists and demonic guardians. The Space Wolves are as stubborn and fierce as they come, but even they faced annihilation in that hellish gauntlet. And then, in those dark halls illuminated only by the strobing red lights of alarms, figures of black and flame emerged at the Space Wolves' flanks. The Legion of the Damned once again arrived right on time. They scythed into the chaos rear ranks, creating utter confusion among the traitors. In the chaos, no pun intended, Bloodhowl's warriors managed to set their charges on the fortress's power conduits. The mission succeeded. The Blackstone Fortress Will of Eternity was critically damaged and forced to withdraw, saving countless lives that would have been its next target. Of course, by the time the surviving Space Wolves looked around to see who had bailed them out, the legionaries were long gone. One grizzled Grey Hunter later commented that he almost thought he'd fought alongside the honored fallen of Fenris. The experience was that otherworldly. As the Imperium was plunged into turmoil by the birth of the Great Rift, the galaxy-wide warp rift that split the Imperium in half, the Legion of the Damned seemingly went into overdrive. With the Astronomican's light flickering and warp travel rendered horribly unpredictable, countless Imperial worlds were cut off and beset by horrors. This era, the Noctis Aeterna, or the Blackness, was perhaps humanity's bleakest hour since the Horus Heresy. Yet, amid the chaos, numerous reports emerged following the same pattern, unforeseen salvation arriving when all seemed lost. During this time, the Legion of the Damned launched what can only be described as a phantom crusade across the sundered Imperium. They appeared on Baal, the homeworld of the Blood Angels, in the immediate aftermath of a Tyranid invasion, helping the Blood Angels purge a demonic incursion that rode in on the heels of the Great Rift's storm. They manifested on Armageddon, a world that had already seen 3 massive wars, to ambush a corn-worshipping horde that was about to overrun the last Imperial holdouts. On dozens of other planets, Forge worlds, Hive worlds, frontier colonies, when warp storms, isolated populations, and enemies besieged them, tales spread of black-armored, flaming warriors coming out of nowhere to smite the invaders, and then disappearing just as quickly. The fact that the Legion could even travel during this period, when most Imperial ships were either stranded or destroyed by warp turbulences, only reinforced their supernatural mystique. Not even the worst warp storm in history could bar these warriors from appearing where they were needed. Truly, in that dark hour, they lived up to their unofficial creed, fighting for the Emperor beyond the point of death, beyond the limits that bind normal men. By now, the pattern should be clear. The Legion of the Damned does not participate in drawn-out campaigns from the beginning, nor do they hold territory or engage in occupations. They are a contingency of last resort, the final ace up the Imperium's sleeve, albeit one that acts according to its own mysterious agenda. Their strategy, if one can call it that, is brutally simple. Arrive unexpectedly, strike the enemy with overwhelming force and terror, and disappear before the foe can mount any real counter. They often attack from an unexpected direction, the rear or flank, where the enemy feels secure, sowing maximum panic. It's shock and awe in the most literal sense. For the Imperium's beleaguered troops, the effect is electrifying. One moment they're about to be overrun. The next moment they see flaming space marines charging into the enemy's back lines. It's no wonder many on the front lines interpret it as divine intervention. Of course, no Imperial commander can plan on the Legion's help. You can't request their aid or predict their arrival. One tongue-in-cheek way to put it, you don't contact the Legion of the Damned. They contact you, and when they do, it's usually by simply showing up amid the piles of enemy dead they just created. It's entirely on their terms. Imperial forces who have fought alongside the Legion describe a mix of awe, gratitude, and not a small amount of unease. It is undeniably terrifying to witness what the Legion does, even when they're on your side. Soldiers have reported the air around the Legionnaires crackling with an unnatural energy, an ozone smell mixed with burning incense that accompanies them. Some swear they felt a bone-deep chill as the Legion passed by, despite the literal flames dancing around those warriors. Even hardened space marines admit to being unnerved when the Legion appears. But all also admit that when the battle hangs in the balance, there are few sights more welcome than those silent, flaming warriors advancing relentlessly on the foe. After victory, the inevitable questions arise. Who were they? What just happened? How do we account for this? Debriefs become tricky. Often a field commander will simply note, "Unexpected Adeptus Astartes allies intervened" in the report, and leave it at that. In some cases, inquisitors will quietly sanitize reports to remove mention of the Legion entirely, to avoid awkward questions. Yet on the ground level, stories spread anyway. The legend of the Legion of the Damned travels by word of mouth across the Imperium's millions of troops and citizens. It becomes a sort of folk legend that in the direst moment, the Emperor might send forth ghost warriors to snatch victory from disaster. True or not, that belief bolsters morale. It's a psychological weapon as much as a literal one, hope given form. Even if 9 out of 10 times no flaming ghosts show up to save the day, that tiny chance that they might can stiffen a hard-pressed unit's resolve. In a universe where despair is often a greater killer than guns, that sliver of hope is not insignificant. With such an incredible tale and so many unearthly aspects surrounding the Legion of the Damned, it's only natural that countless theories and interpretations have sprung up throughout the Imperium to explain them. We, with the benefit of piecing together hidden lore, see the Firehawk's origin as the most compelling truth. All the evidence lines up too neatly. The banner, the recovered artifacts, the secret recordings. It strongly indicates the Legion are indeed the warp-cursed remnants of that lost chapter, fighting on as an undead army of Astartes. Essentially, they are real space marines who went through hell, quite literally, and came out the other side, changed. However, not everyone in universe is privy to those secrets, and even among those who suspect the truth, uncertainty persists. So naturally, other theories circulate about the Legion's true nature. Let's briefly survey some of the prominent ideas. The Emperor's Angels, divine intervention theory. A widely held belief among the common folk and many members of the ecclesiarchy is that the Legion of the Damned are literally angels of the God Emperor, his divine wrath made manifest. In this view, when the Emperor sees his people in desperate need, he dispatches these immortal, flame-wreathed angels to smite the foes of mankind. After all, the Imperial Creed teaches that the Emperor protects, so why not through an elite ghostly hit squad? This interpretation conveniently fits the narrative of faith, the Emperor sending miraculous aid. And indeed, to a panicked guardsman on a trench line, the sight of these warriors must seem nothing short of miraculous. The fact that they look like death incarnate doesn't contradict Imperial faith. If anything, it reinforces that the Emperor's angels are terrifying to the impure. This theory, while comforting to believers, doesn't offer much in the way of mechanism. It's essentially saying, a miracle happened, which might be enough for the faithful, but leaves the scholars unsatisfied. Ghosts of the Astartes, restless dead theory. Another popular tale, especially in the ranks of the Imperial Guard, is that the Legion of the Damned are the restless spirits of space marines who died with unfinished duty. According to this legend, these warriors were so loyal and so filled with righteous fury that not even death could stop them from fighting. They rise from their graves when needed, quite literally as avenging spirits clad in the semblance of power armor. This explains the skeletal motifs, they're basically walking dead, and their invulnerability. Ghosts can't be killed by bullets, naturally. It's a very superstitious view, but in a galaxy overrun with warp phenomena, some argue it's not far-fetched. The difference between a demon and a vengeful human spirit is academic to the average person. Both are supernatural. However, skeptics of this theory point out that the Legion leaves behind physical evidence, bolter shells, sometimes even bodies of their own that can be examined. True ghosts usually don't drop off equipment with serial numbers tracing back to a space marine armory. So, if they are ghosts, they're a very peculiar kind that still uses material weapons. Warp entities, or demons in disguise. The heretical theory. Some of the more paranoid or puritanical inquisitors have considered the possibility that the Legion of the Damned might not be loyal at all, but rather some warp entities masquerading as righteous spirits. Could it be a chaos trick? Perhaps a chaos god amused by toying with its rivals, sending out false saviors? This theory is generally fringe, and for good reason. If the Legion were demons or chaos-born, they have an odd way of showing it by exclusively killing heretics, demons, Xenos, and generally helping the Imperium. Not exactly the typical Chaos MO. One infamous radical inquisitor, we'll refrain from naming him, but those familiar with certain heretical cases might guess, once tried to make the case that the Legion should be purged as warp-tainted traitors. He even attempted to capture a few Legionnaires for study during one of their appearances. The result? The Legionnaires vanished, of course, and that Inquisitor's ship suffered a series of unfortunate malfunctions that let the Legion slip away. One might interpret that as the Emperor's subtle way of saying, hands off. After that embarrassing debacle, the Inquisitor's peers were less inclined to view the Legion as a threat. While healthy suspicion is the Inquisition's default stance on anything warp-related, the overwhelming weight of evidence and the Legion's consistent behavior suggests they are allies, not enemies. So this theory remains on the extreme fringe, typically held only by those who haven't actually benefited from a Legion intervention. Those who have seen the Legion save the day tend to be a lot less eager to label them demons. The Psyker projection. Collective faith theory. Here's a more metaphysical idea floated by some scholars and a few open-minded Astartes librarians. The Legion might be a psychic manifestation of the Emperor's will and the Imperium's collective faith. Warhammer lore establishes that belief and emotion can manifest entities in the warp. That's essentially how chaos gods form. So, what if, during moments of utmost desperation, the unified fear and hope of humans, combined with the Emperor's guiding light, actually conjure these warriors into being? In other words, the Imperium wishes for saviors so hard that the warp obliges by creating the Legion of the Damned. It's almost like an unconscious miracle. Billions of prayers coalescing into a real, if temporary, fighting force. Proponents of this theory point to the fact that the Legion always shows up when hope is nearly dead and disappears when the job is done, much like a spontaneous psychic phenomenon responding to intense emotion. It's a wild theory, yes, but not entirely out of bounds. The Emperor is a god in the warp after all, to the faithful at least, and his power could theoretically work wonders via the collective belief of humanity. Of course, this theory doesn't easily explain the evidence linking the Legion to the Firehawks, unless one argues that the Firehawks were the initial template that the Emperor's will then reproduces as needed. Regardless, it suggests that the Legion could be less physical space marines and more warp-energized constructs that just mimic space marines. A hard theory to prove or disprove, but an interesting one that speaks to the power of faith. Time-lost saviors, warp-time anomaly theory. The warp is known to play havoc with time. Ships have entered it and emerged centuries earlier or later, or not at all. Some whisper that the Legion of the Damned might be space marines displaced in time, perhaps from the distant past or future, sent to critical moments in history by some twist of fate. There are even records of battles in earlier millennia where unexplained phantom warriors aided Imperial forces. Later, scribes retroactively speculated these could have been the Legion acting out of chronological order. Could the Firehawks' misjump have flung some of them into different eras to fight and then vanish, only to reconvene later? It's pretty far-fetched and relies on lots of conjecture. Time travel in Warhammer isn't unheard of, but is very rare. Most likely those old sightings were unrelated or exaggerated and got lumped into the Legion myth later. Still, the idea is out there that the Legion might not experience time linearly, that to them, appearing in 540 and then in 999 M41 might be just different chapters of the same Odyssey. If true, it would make them even more bizarre, but at this point one would shrug and say, why not? They're already flaming undead space knights. Add time travel to the list. Now, the Legion of the Damned itself isn't exactly stopping to clarify which, if any, of these theories is correct. They don't have a PR department. No Legionnaire has ever sat down for an interview, and probably never will. So the mystery persists, which frankly is part of their allure. For those with access to the hidden truth, the Inquisition, certain Space Marine chapter masters, etc., the working assumption is that they are indeed the Firehawk's remnants, and they just categorize the Legion under weird stuff we grudgingly accept. But to the average citizen or soldier, the Legion can be whatever their imagination or faith conjures it to be. Angels, ghosts, demons, living flames. Perhaps in the end, the idea of the Legion is as important as the reality. One thing that is not up for debate is the Legion's loyalty. They have time and again proven themselves fierce allies of the Imperium. They have never shown hostility to loyal Imperial forces, aside from maybe startling a few who mistook them for an attack at first. They target the enemies of mankind with unerring consistency. This has led even some hardliners in the Inquisition to begrudgingly classify the Legion as exempt from the usual purging protocols that anything warp-tainted would normally warrant. As one Inquisitor was recorded saying, "I personally believe them to be warp-tainted and in need of purgation, but whilst they fight for the Imperium, bringing destruction to the foes of mankind, their destruction remains a low priority, for me at least." It's a very pragmatic approach. So long as these particular mutants or spirits or whatever they are kill the right targets, the Inquisition will holster its flamers. Some even see the Legion as a potential asset to be studied. Maybe secrets of the warp could be learned from them, or that would help Imperial forces. However, that's easier said than done. Every attempt to study or capture a Legionnaire has failed, often in ironic ways. It's as if the universe itself conspires to shield them from prying hands. All of this places the Imperium in an odd position. Here are warriors that by all standard definitions should be considered heretical, or at least extremely suspect. They have no official chapter status. They're warp-touched. They operate outside any chain of command. And yet, their actions are unambiguously beneficial to the Imperium. It's a classic case of the exception to the rule. So the Imperium, an empire not exactly known for flexibility or tolerance, turns a mostly blind eye and even quietly hopes for the Legion's help when things get really bad. It's a testament to how desperate the galaxy has become that even the Inquisition is like, warp-tainted fiery skeleton marines? Sure, fine, whatever. At least they're on our side. In the grim darkness of the far future, even death itself may become a weapon in the Emperor's service. The Legion of the Damned embodies everything terrifying and heartening about the Imperium of man. They are the damned who refuse to die, the lost warriors who became an avenging host. Wreathed in spectral flame and driven by unyielding faith, or perhaps wrath, they appear when absolutely everything is on the line. They don't seek glory or reward. They don't even seek recognition. They exist only to destroy the enemies of humanity with an almost supernatural fury. Their story, from the tragedy of the Firehawks to the eerie battles of the present, is a testament to the boundless determination and stubbornness that defines the Adeptus Astartes. Space Marines are said to know no fear, and the Legion of the Damned seems to have none left at all, not even fear of death or what lies beyond it. If anything, they have weaponized their own death. They turned a curse into a tool for righteous vengeance. After all, how do you scare a warrior who is literally on fire and doesn't flinch when shot point blank? The enemies of the Imperium have learned to be afraid of the dark, for that is where the Legion lurks. For the common citizen or soldier of the Imperium, the mere rumor of the Legion's existence can be a comfort. It means that no matter how dire the situation, there is a chance, however small, that help might come literally out of nowhere, in the form of silent, flaming knights who cannot be stopped. It's the kind of hope that's almost painful in a setting as grim as the 41st millennium, but it's hope nonetheless. The ecclesiarchy might not officially preach about the Legion. Indeed, many priests are unaware or only know the sanitized, angelic intervention version. But amongst the rank and file, the story spreads on its own. Should you ever find yourself on a forsaken battlefield with the hordes of darkness closing in, and you glimpse flickering flames at the edge of your vision, steel yourself. You may be about to witness a miracle, or a nightmare, or a bit of both. The Legion of the Damned has arrived. They will not speak to you. The only sounds heralding their presence will be the crackle of ethereal flames and the thunder of their bolt guns as they wordlessly set about their grisly work. If you're wise, you'll take heart and fight on with renewed vigor at their side, for no servants of the Emperor could ask for more fearsome backup. Just don't expect a friendly chat or a post-battle debrief. When the last enemy lies dead and the smoke clears, you may turn around to find the legionnaires gone as if they were never there, perhaps leaving only scorched footprints or a fluttering banner with a certain motto as proof they ever fought. In the end, the Legion of the Damned is a grim paradox of hope in a galaxy of unending war. They are damned souls who still carry the Emperor's torch. They are an undying reminder that duty does not always end in death. Their very existence is both a comfort to the faithful and a terror to the wicked. With each appearance and disappearance, their legend grows, and so does the message it carries. Even in the bleakest darkness, the Emperor's light burns. If not in the heavens, then in the eyes of his warriors, who refuse to fall. The Legion's tale reminds us of a final, sobering truth of the 41st millennium. Sometimes the only thing more frightening than the enemies of mankind are the miracles that save it. So, if on that fateful day you face oblivion and suddenly eerie warriors wreathed in fire emerge at your side, know that you are not dreaming. Fight on, for the Emperor has sent his damned legion to fight with you. Pray you never need them, but take comfort that if you do, even death itself might show up to enforce the Emperor's will. In the horror and chaos of the far future, even the damned may be your salvation. The Legion of the Damned will continue to stride forth from smoke and shadow as long as they are needed, ever loyal, ever deadly, and ever silent. The Imperium's most chilling saviors, fighting for the Emperor beyond the end of all things.